All crowds.
Concern for the infrastructure improvements, and apologize if we didn't have a formal plan available prior to now, and hopefully this is enough to give us some direction moving forward. I think skipping the first 2 pages, that's some general information I wanted to talk about in terms of capital reserves and funding and where the purpose for the original loan or bond or whatever you want to call it came from. If you get hard to go to sleep at night, you might want to pick that up and it might help you fall asleep. But if you go to the 3rd page though, when you start looking at the tier 1 sewer improvements, you know, we've got 4 lift stations that were quoted in the report, and those lift stations pump into a part of the system that gets to the plant by gravity sewer. And so when you start looking at upgrading any of those lift stations, you look at that transmission capability getting to the plant, and it's currently at or near capacity. And so if we're going to start looking at increasing pumping capacity, the first thing we need to do is start at the plant and look at being able to get that added pumping capacity to the plant through that transmission system.
Can I stop you and just
Sure.
ask you just a very
On who you ask, but yeah, go ahead.
well, that's the way I understand,
it.
And so the I guess just a very 50,000 foot altitude question I have for you is, have you dived into that study? Because I've looked at it and I've read it, but you know, I don't know enough about our own system to say, do the recommendations make sense? Are they, is it too much? Is it too little? Because, you know, I'm going to be honest, you know, engineers, they get paid based on the size of a contract. And I just want to make certain that what they're suggesting is just not overkill.
And so to answer your question, I looked at the 12-inch gravity line on Church Street and looking at the slope that's available to carry the flow, which is by gravity, and the slope of the line is what allows you to increase capacity if you steepen the slope or not. But yeah, it can flow about 1,000 to 1,250 gallons a minute, and that can depend on some roughness coefficients of the pipe. It can depend on when it comes into a manhole and when it goes back into the next manhole, you know, what that entrance and exit losses are in that line. So, and then I looked at the pumps, the south section pump, which is one of the big ones that takes flow all the way from Point Clear, and then you look at Fells, which is on the list too, and so you use those pump curves and you look at when 2 pumps are pumping at south section, that you can get about 850 gallons a minute into the Church Street outfall. So if you're at 1,000 to 1,250, you got some cushion. And then you look at the Fells lift station, and when 2 pumps pump from that lift station, you can get about 650 gallons a minute. So now you're at 850 and 650, you're about 1,500 gallons a minute. If those conditions were to become the normal versus the exception, you know, to what our transmission capacity and needs are today. And as things grow, and we're going to upgrade the pumps anyway, you know, you're going to have to expect that transmission system is going to have to be improved before you can put too much more into it. So I have looked at that part of it. I have not looked in that great a detail of the Bayou Drive, and when you see the recommendation, you'll see that I'm looking at maybe 2 or 3 different steps for accomplishing that.
Right.
But that gets back to, and we'll start. So the Church Street outfall system is the first one, and you know, we need to have a survey done. Obviously, what we'd like to do is go ahead and decide of the 4 or 5 engineering firms that are on a list that would typically say they are qualified to do that work, and I feel confident that all of them are. You know, we can get qualification packages from them, or we can look at some type of master contract agreement with all of them and say, you know, over time we're going to try to get everybody work, but you know, we feel like these upgrades are critical enough to where we want to go ahead and start working with people sooner than later, and we can do that. That's up to y'all, and we'll certainly be able to put out any request for qualifications tomorrow if that's what you want to do, and I'm happy doing that. If you want to take the few that are, and I think there's probably 4 or 5 that are qualified with the full survey, civil engineering capability that we can work with, you know, as we go through this process. But that's the decision that we can get from y'all tonight, or we can do it anyway. I mean, we can get qualifications and ask for them. I just hate to do that if we're talking about, and I've got 5 projects on this first phase list of infrastructure improvements for wastewater, and all of them would have to answer all 5 requests for qualifications, and I mean, it's time consuming to them, and they know they're not going to get all 5 of them anyway. So even if we just drew names out of a hat, we'd at least have a starting point for who would be better suited for the next job.
Richard, just looking at your first 5, I mean, that's barely over $1 million if I'm adding this up correctly. Is that?
Yeah, and so
right.
you take the Church Street outfall line and you look at Church Street and the storm sewer part of it. And so we feel like, and Richard Johnson and I and Arthur and George have gone down there and looked in some of the inlets, and Richard can speak to the storm sewer better than I can, but I mean, there are some problems with the storm sewer, and the neighbor who lives at the corner of Church and Magnolia, he talked about how the corner can be inundated with water and sometimes backs up into other yards, and I mean, it becomes a problem. I haven't seen that, but I believe in what I've heard that there is a problem, and you look at the condition of the pipe, and it's old corrugated metal pipe. The inlets are in some ways, some of them are just brick, you know, and there are some that are a little bit better than others, but I mean, it's and you can ride down the street and you can see places where the asphalt looks to be caving in underneath what may be the old 8-inch gravity line that probably still carries residential load from, you know, the laterals off of that. And so when you look at the $350,000, one thing, that's cutting one little trench down the road and putting it back together, and then we don't talk about it anymore. If you're going to be in there though, and there was a quote for underground power from Oak to Magnolia, I believe, and that was $750,000. And I think part of that motivation was there's some pretty nice oak trees along that stretch of Church Street. And do we want to not have to trim the oak tree limbs in order to allow them to grow and put the power underground to avoid doing that? I mean, but there was a quote at one time in 2015 that suggested you're looking at about $750,000 to put power underground. Now, that doesn't extend up Church Street toward Fairhope Avenue. It just stops at Magnolia from the cost estimate I saw. And then we got cast iron gas main in there. We'd want to replace that. So when you start looking at all of what we can look at in terms of alternates to accomplish while we're there, you know, then it's easily to get that project up to maybe $3 million.
Okay.
And some of that's just getting to Magnolia. That's not bringing it all the way up to Fells, which is where the infrastructure improvement program will start. And until we get the survey, we don't know. We really won't know how to attack the existing gravity sewer, because what I'd like to do is take the 12-inch gravity main that I believe is PVC and convert all the old clay pipe that's in the 8-inch line on Church and take all those laterals back at least to the lot line and put them into that 12-inch PVC line. And I think
uses
that would
a
be
gravity
better.
line.
Well, it's a gravity line now.
All the way down Church now, Forest?
Right.
Okay.
But we're going to convert that to a force main, and probably it'd be a 16 or 18-inch force main.
Right.
But anyway, that's the first project. And the second project is the same outfall system that we have down Fairhope Avenue from Ingleside. It turns north on Fairwood and then turns west on Bayou and so that outfall, they were talking about maybe converting that to a 30-inch gravity line. It's currently an 18-inch. And I think I like the notion of allowing it to be force mains all the way through to the plant. The difference in sizes, though, comes back to if we want to upgrade the doghouse manhole with capacity, which is, or lift station, I'm sorry, which is the lift station that's just south of Walgreens. That, right now, for that lift station, you've got the intermediate school lift station pumps into it. You got Thompson Hall lift station pumps into it. And I think, and then you got some coming from Fairfield that come along Greeno Road near the high school. But I think we can extend the force main from Thompson Hall or Gayfer and Thompson Hall, or Fairhope Avenue and Thompson Hall, and run a force main, collect the Thompson Hall lift station, collect White Grove, collect the intermediate school, and take it all the way to the Ingleside Fairhope Avenue manhole and discharge it into this force main we're talking about, so we don't have to do anything with the doghouse manhole. Just leave it like it is. But in order to know how much flow would be part of that scenario, and I would want to be able to look at some growth planning and look at force mains outside of what this study from Goodwin Mills and Kay would accomplish.
Because I would think that some of the growth patterns are going to be high growth, but we have some older parts of the city that are very dense already and may not grow that much. So we're just basically rehabbing what we have.
Right, and that gets back to the outside. Once you get east of Greeno Road, you're looking at, there's a pretty big piece of property between Bishop and 13 that's north of Fairhope Avenue, and I mean there may be 180 acres going up through there all the way to Gayfer.
Yeah, that's going to be an explosive.
And so, and then you got property near Fairhope Avenue and 181. We're talking to people now about trying to develop some of that. So that part of the upgrades need, we need to be careful about not shooting ourselves in the foot and not putting enough capacity going down to the plant. And then, but we also talked about whether we should shed some of that load and look at maybe a new site for a treatment plant to use as a reuse water system for the golf course. And that I think there'll be capacity down the road that'll fill that up pretty quick too. But right now we need to deal with what we know, and that is we've got a transmission issue that we've got to upgrade capacity for, and it's got to start at the plant and work its way out. And those are the two major outfall lines.
Do we have a need for fresh water at the golf course? I mean, those lakes, I've never seen them.
Well, we have
up.
had to turn wells on the other side of Walmart and pump those wells to waste to drain through the ditch system to get to that way.
Okay.
But we have done
Maybe
that.
because I didn't notice that you were pumping well water in there then.
Yes.
Okay.
But that's not, that's not an everyday occurrence, but it does happen. It has happened. So those are the two major projects, I would say. And then with the new camera truck on the way, we still need to improve our mapping system so that we can attach all of that video to specific attributes on that map and get it set up to where when we start looking at laterals, or we start looking at main lines, or we start identifying manholes and grading them, we have a system in place where we will have that information, for the life of the system. So, and Volkert had given us a price before to do that. I think, and they also have given us a price to renew the contract for the CE&I inspection work on the rehabilitation contract that we've renewed, which we're going to start with manholes in the valley area. And I want to make sure everybody's aware too. We talk about the overflow in Middle Street, and we spent last year $350,000 lining a lot of that system. We've gone in and found we smoke tested a little bit after June and found a couple of manholes that were offset to the frame, to the manhole, and were leaking. And we fixed those. And then recently we've done some work with the intake of the pumping system at that lift station to try to increase the suction lift capacity of that pump station. So we feel like we've tried to work toward resolving some of those issues. Rehabilitation is another deal, and I don't want people to think that overflow hadn't caused us to act. It had. We have been acting on that, and I don't want people to think that this is a result of growth, because that collection basin really is, from maybe Morphe at the very northern end to Ingleside to section, and so that's the place that funnels down to that basin, and that's not where the big growth areas are. So, it's not a function of growth; it's a function of aged infrastructure. So, and that's where the rehabilitation issues come in, and we'll be working that section obviously some, and then we'll have to work in through the fruit and nut too. But so
Now, in that discussion there, do you have anything for that? Since the engineer got everything you need, is that correct?
what's that for?
For the rehabilitation of
Yeah,
the
yeah, we've got the CE&I, which is construction, engineering, and inspection.
Right.
They've given us a quote, and we've dug out the old contract that we had from the last year's project, and we're going to recommend we renew that with the new quote that we've gotten.
Okay.
So that's where we are with that. We've got
That'll be at the next meeting?
yes, sir.
Okay.
Unless we can call a special meeting next week, we'll do that too.
Whatever you want to do, brother. Just need to
Hey,
get-
I'm here all day. But anyway, that's all set to go.
Mainly, I'm just asking to make sure that's, we say we're going to do this, we're going to do this. I like to put a time frame on it, so I know that if it's not, where are we in this?
Right.
And so if it's, that's fine with y'all, we'll start it up then.
I'm sorry?
If it's fine with your department, we'll start in 2 weeks, we'll bring it up before the
Yes.
council to get it approved.
We'll have it set up
Right,
for
'cause
that.
everything else has been approved in the past
Right.
meetings. It's just the C&I we need to get
Yeah.
taken care of.
I agree. And then the fourth and fifth items on the infrastructure improvement list for the wastewater is the Fells Avenue lift station at Mobile Street. That lift station you'll see at the west end of Fells, where the walkway follows into the park there on the bluff. And I don't know how long that lift station has been there. I've looked at the electric panel, I've looked in the wet well, and I've seen the pumps in the dry well part of it, and we've worked on that station quite a bit. It's subject to having things get clogged up in the suction pipe, and I don't know if that's from a lot of corrosion within that pipe that's caused some areas in that pipe to be less than full, in terms of pipe opening. But there are issues with that lift station, and we think the best thing to do is replace it altogether. So that would be the fourth project. And then the fifth project deals with the Grand Hotel, and that'll be the next section of sewer. When you get past that first tier that was studied, we'll be looking at the second tier items. But right now with the SCADA system, we've seen the flow at the hotel lift station rise significantly, and they're doing a lot of work in there, and I'm not blaming the work they're doing on that, but that system's pretty old as well, and it's never really been smoke tested. It's on what would be considered private property. I'd like to find a way to make some kind of an agreement with the hotel management to where we can at least maintain the system like we would any other part of our system. The water system in there has a water meter that doesn't necessarily register properly, and we're billing on just an amount that they used at some point in time, and that's a straight bill every month. I think we need to go in there, and I think we need to look at putting individual meters at each building so they can manage their usage better. They can identify leaks easier, and I think they'll have a better system when it's all said and done, and we can flush hydrants in there. But I think to have a capability to have easements or maintenance responsibility, I think, is in our favor. You know, if it's just like anybody else on private. Remember, we've seen it time and time, the manhole with the rock under the riser ring so that it drained the ground around it, you know. I mean, that's, when you don't have access to things like that that are important to the infrastructure, you know, things can get away from you pretty quick. So if we're looking at trying to mitigate stormwater and the cause of overflows that is primarily stormwater from happening, and we need to have a dialogue with them, and we need to try to work with them. That, you know, when you go back to the Fells lift station, I would feel like $125,000 is an approximate price for that. The study in the Grand Hotel, which would be a video assessment of the condition of the pipe, it would be some smoke testing work in there. It would be an assessment of the lift station condition and capacity. I think that's probably, you're looking at $35,000 for a consultant to come in and perform that assessment. I think it's well worth the investment. To, you know, it may be that lift station, if you're not familiar with it, when you turn into the hotel, there's a parking and maintenance area to the south of that entrance, and that lift station's kind of behind the fence and in that parking area next to security. You know, if it turns out that we need to look at a different site, you know, it might be we can continue their gravity line across 98 and have something that we can access on the other side of 98, and maybe, you know, it'd be something we'd need to obviously landscape and hide from, you know, being obvious, but it would be a much more convenient location for us to access maintenance to a lift station. And that's just a possibility. I'm not saying that's what we're going to do, but that's something we need to look at. And then those are the 5 sewer projects that I think are like first tier items of work that we can get done and accomplish without, you know, shooting ourselves in the foot and causing more problems. But
now the 5th one is just a study.
It's a study.
It doesn't include any cost of repairs to the Grand Hotel.
That's correct. That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Well, really, do you think you need to study before you have a chat with the Grand Hotel, or talk to them about possibilities that could happen, what we would really like to see happen?
I think we need to have a discussion with them before we get too far along into it, yes.
Okay. I think it's a great idea.
Well, I think we need to, but and I'll be happy to prompt that conversation with them, and anybody that wants to be a participant in that, I'll be happy to keep you informed of it. On the water projects, the original proposal that we had done had a $2 million item in there for a water transmission line. And that transmission line was on County Road 33, and it involved being able to add well capacity to that site that is on 33 just south of Boone Lane. There's a water tank there. And in order to upgrade the transmission line, I think it's important that we find out what the estimated capacity of that aquifer that we're trying to pump out of can be. And Dan O'Donnell, you know, he's been the geologist here for quite some time. He's proposed a groundwater level monitoring program that can accomplish that, and that you can find that in the back of your report here, but it's $6,000, and then that will give us enough information to now look at, well, how do we upgrade that site so that it can, you know, not only we can put the wells down, but we can put a treatment capability out there, and then the transmission system that'll get that into the rest of the water system without causing too much pressure. And one thing we'll wind up doing most likely is putting an altitude valve at the base of that tank, so that when the tank's full, we're not pumping out and overflowing the tank versus, you know, pumping into the distribution system, because I don't think you'll be able to get the most out of that site until you're able to produce the water that you can produce and push it through the system to other places that are, you know, the other demands of the system. But that'll come after we recognize what the capacity of that site is from that project.
How taxed is that water supply right now? I mean, we at capacity?
I think,
on it?
you know, and I've talked with Curtis and Jay and Dan a little bit about that, and their only concern is for an extended drought period. And we do have a water conservation plan in place, and there may be, you know, a need. I don't foresee it happening, you know, in the next couple of years, but an extended drought would make us feel, you know, like we need to have people conserve water. And that's from an irrigation viewpoint. That's not from, you know, potable water service.
How long do you think it would take to do is this a 6 to 12 month project?
It's
roughly?
a 12-month study.
12 months.
Yeah,
but
that's
I
a
mean, the
12
whole, you know, the whole first phase, is that a 12
Well, I mean, each project, you know, is going to stand on its own, but what I anticipate doing is as these projects get to the point where we can see, you know, what we have going, you know, beyond that and the timing to implement that, I think we're going to try to merge, you know, whether it be a new force main system getting to Fairhope and Ingleside, or whether it's upgrading the lift station at South Section. I mean, South Section lift station is going to have to be upgraded next too, but I mean, we need to start on that just as soon as we get started with this transmission system. But that'll be the next project, and that'll be a pretty significant project. I mean, if we can move it up just a little bit, you know, we might be able to have more room on the site where our landfill is, you know, right there on South Section. That may be the best place for it, but you know, the site we have now is really small and confined, and we might want to get away from that, but we'll work on that as we start getting these other projects going. On the gas project, working with the Financial Advisory Committee, they thought, well, maybe we need to do an assessment of the gas system, you know, get a map validated that we have. And we did have a couple of low pressure areas during the coldest of weather. And so we would like to model the high pressure side, which brings that gas from Bay Minette down to, you know, as far as County Road 1. And then the Rock Creek had a couple of places in that distribution system that we saw some low pressure, so we'd like to add that. And you know, as we do the cast iron gas main replacement, we'd like to be able to model the low pressure system that's serving that, and make sure we size those lines, you know, for what may be the future of that system. But the Financial Advisory Committee thought if we got a request out for qualifications of professionals that have been involved in both mapping gas systems on this GIS-based mapping system we have, and then cast iron gas main replacement, which would initially involve a assessment of the locations based on population density, and you know, there may be population densities that trigger priority 1 replacement type projects, and then there may be population densities and you know, may not be quite as critical. But that's what you want to do, is you want to set up the priorities for you know, what parts of that system you want to phase out first.
Richard, if you're going through the sewer system upgrades and you tear up a street and you find out that in fact there's some of that cast iron gas
Yes.
line that you need to replace, how do you envision that happening? Because, you know, is that going to be something that occurs daily or weekly? Are you going to have additional staff with the sewer, with the gas department that comes in and does that, or do you have a contractor on demand? You know, when you start, stop,
I think
it runs
it'll
up
be,
the cost. So
I think it'll be a contractor on demand type concept for that. And
they'll just be on.
And it'll be more, you know, the projects we do for the transmission upgrades, they'll be specific projects that are related to specific right-of-ways. When we start getting into the rehabilitation work, where we're videoing these sections and we can line mainline sewer, we still may wind up having to replace laterals, and we will be in subdivisions and blocks, but it depends on what we have to do in there to know.
Vice versa, if you got a gas line you need to replace.
And that's exactly right.
Then you might say, well, it's just
Exactly.
as cheap to replace the
Yes,
sewage pipe as it is to rehab.
that's exactly
Probably
right.
would be cheaper.
No doubt about
New
it.
pipe's cheaper than probably rehabbing it if you've got the trench dug, probably.
There's a good possibility. And there's a couple of point repairs, you know, some of these offset joints on these older clay lines, you really can't line them until you go in and replace that offset joint. So, you know, it depends on how much you're digging up and what the consequence of that is. And I can't answer that question until we go to each specific right-of-way and actually
Also, a
see
lot of
what
that's
we
due to
have.
depth. Most gas lines are 4 feet deep.
Right.
Whereas some of those lines you're talking about, the point repairs, are 10 to 12 feet deep.
Yes, that's correct.
So by digging up the gas lines, you're not really going to be able to see the sewer, or maybe I'll touch a portion of the lateral depending on how steep it came up. Most of it's still going to be under you due to the depth functions of the sewer, because all gas is relatively 3.5, 4 feet deep.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, looking at I understand that the cost could grow as you dig stuff up and find out what you're dealing with, but looking at the ballpark of $1 million, I mean, we don't even have to really debate how we're going to go about funding that. I mean, that's out of cash flow and reserves.
We have that. I would say double that number, because you're going to do that cast iron replacement. There's just no, if you're there to replace.
If you've dug it up, you might as well go ahead and
Well,
do
and
it.
that's exactly, I mean,
Right.
The bottom line is
these
if
are
you're
the first
there,
5
with
issues we need to address.
even with drainage, you come across some old lines that are either stopped up or metal corrugated pipe that aren't full of holes. While you're there, let's get them fixed, because it's a whole lot cheaper to do it now than fill it all in, bring a whole nother crew to find it and start fixing it then too. So, but
A lot less hassle.
it's kind of like remodeling a home, an old home. That when you do start, there's no telling what you're going to find in there.
And if I could kind of interject, one of the things that Richard and I, when we looked at Church Street, and if you'll recall from the budget, our number one drainage project in the Central Business District was Church Street from Magnolia to its outfall there north of Oak Street. And as we walked it the other day and looked at everything, you know, it would make no sense to be doing a major drainage improvement project while at the same time you could be replacing the cast iron gas there, because understand it would be installing a new service and then abandoning the old one. That was what we'd be doing as we went through. And you know, you don't have to dig up the old service. You just have to, when you have a trench that you're doing drainage, while you're doing that work, lay the new gas service and do the lateral services as well. And then as we got to talking with his outfall that's going to run on Church Street and needs to get all the way up to Fells, it seems like this would be best to be an omnibus project and include the drainage portion from Magnolia going north. And as kind of a kicker, you as a council have already budgeted $300,000 for that drainage project in the current budget, so that could be applied to the omnibus project because it's going to address drainage at that time as well. And I think when we got to that point, that's when we said the first thing we have to do is we have to have a detailed survey of the entirety of Church Street that tells us where every utility is, where every geometric curb point is, edge of pavement, every power pole, every utility pole, so that we know what we have there to work around and what we have to do. Because I think the biggest challenge on the drainage on that portion of Church Street that needs addressing is that it's all on the west side and it's intermingled among the root balls of the oak trees that are just gorgeous through there. But it looks like the southbound lane is free of everything, so it may be a wise decision to actually put the new drainage down the middle of that lane of the road and abandon that and give the trees some relief, as well as take care of the gas service while we're there and everything else, whereas the force mains or the gravity mains for the sewer appears to be going down the center of basically the northbound lane.
Take the trees that much longer to get over to the new pipe.
Give them some breathing room. Yes, sir.
They'll run to it.
And
Sorry,
I think,
boys.
But hopefully we can bid it with some alternates in there that we will have some flexibility in the total cost when it's all said and done. But, you know, there's going to be some things, if you're going to be in there, though, you just need to do. And that's just no doubt about
Let's
it.
talk money for a minute, Jim. You brought that up. You know, we've got not only 3 times that in reserves, and when I say reserves, I don't mean our rainy day fund, just in some of our utility reserves. We've got the triangle debt will be paid off in December of this year. That frees up $1.15 million annually. We also have, I mean, you know this, I'm sure, we have about 800 and something thousand dollars available from AMEA. We need to go ahead and request that money. It could, you know, the first 600 and something thousand can go to pay for that study to Stewart Engineering. It can be used
Well,
for that.
yeah, we've signed that contract with Stewart Engineering, and then that is plans for what is Plan A of a potentially $9 million improvement to all the substations, well, not all of them, but almost all of them.
That's roughly 10% of it.
But, you know, we would, depending on how you order and put deposits on new I don't know, I've never bought a transformer for a substation, so it's gonna be new to me, but I'm assuming that you can pay a little bit going in and
A year later,
pay,
when it shows up.
and pay a little bit as
When
it.
you're ready
Pay
to
the
order
rest.
those, you got money.
I'm
to
well
go
aware of
to
that
for
number.
Down payment for a lot of that.
And then the electrical part of this report, you know, we are talking about relocating the Nichols substation to the corner of Middle and Young. And, you know, getting that property secured is one of the priorities that we need to have too, and I'd like to go ahead and start working on that if that's okay with y'all.
Do you think that's gonna be a big cost? I mean, you and I kind of talked about that one day we were riding
No,
around.
it's not a big
Not a
significant
big
cost,
deal.
but it's something that may take time. I don't think we'll have to go through any condemnation type stuff, but the guy that owns it that I reached out to back maybe June of last year, I think he lives in Omaha, Nebraska. And so coordinating his availability and getting everything from an appraisal to an agreement.
Now, were you
may
gonna
take some
shut down,
time.
were you proposing to shut down the Church Street station altogether?
Yes. Yeah, this new substation will replace the Nichols and the church.
And then, so then we have that lot.
Yes.
Which has some value,
Right,
a lot of value in
Right.
that part of town.
yeah. And there's a little bit of discussion in here about reserves, and I'm glad you brought that up. You know, we do live in a disaster-prone area, whether it be a hurricane or whether it be a tornado or a flood, and it gives you strength and credit rating. I mean, Jimmy can tell, I mean, you know, I don't know where that line is, if it's 2 months worth of revenue or 3 months worth of revenue. Somewhere there's a line that would suggest that this is prudent, you know, operations to have that cushion.
Well,
Because when you do have restoration efforts on, you don't have necessarily all of your revenue because people have, you know, maybe left for other reasons and there's nothing to come back to at this point. But you also have a pretty significant restoration cost, you know, in terms of infrastructure, whether it's replacing poles and wire, whether it's, you know, replacing plant facilities. I mean, those are issues you need just, you know, I'm not suggesting we don't have that. I'm not suggesting that how much we should have. I'm just suggesting that's one of the considerations that I think is important.
what we're gonna give you are numbers that says, this is how much we have this year, and this year, and this year, and this year. And then you will say, well, this is what we need, and if our needs are greater than what our haves are, and then we'll decide whether or not we wanna go out and borrow the money, or if we just wanna spread it out a little bit longer.
That's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, because we have a great bond rating now, and we have our rainy day fund, which is not our utility rainy day
Right.
fund, but it is our rainy day fund, which brings up our bond rating. Our debt is so small right now, and we're in
That's
extremely
good. That's
good shape.
a good place to be.
I was thinking I mean, and this is just my thought on how I would approach it. I mean, if we had just a $10 million line of credit and have the draws, you know, approve the draws via accounts or whatever as needed. But if you did $10 million and got a 10-year fixed rate with a 2 or 3 year draw period and then a 7 or 8 year amortization period, I think that would cover what the max you would potentially need. I think the rest you could fund out of cash flow and reserves, and then you'd still have your debt completely wiped out in 10 years. I don't think you need to go into a bond,
I wouldn't bond, I
Issuing.
wouldn't either. I get a
Well,
lot of
the
credit,
other thing about
and then you
that-
wouldn't pay interest on it until you drew
unless you
it.
needed
Yeah,
it. And we may not ever.
And you may not have to need it,
Correct.
but you
I
have it
would
there in
say-
case
But
you
you've
do
got
need
the
it.
cushion so that Richard's comfortable
Goes
getting
into your
started.
question of it is senseless to go get an RFQ from an engineer, do all this work, and then when he gives it to you and says, oh, by the way, this is a little bit more than we have, but we do need to do this. Well, gee, we don't have that much money. We'll have to wait another year.
We got it.
But that's my point. I'm just saying, it's nice to know these ideas that everybody's in line with as far as you and I have discussed.
Oh, I agree, yeah. That's,
You know, you get the project, we'll get it paid.
Yeah, that's right. When we've retired so much debt, we've freed up other funds. And like I said, like just for instance, we have that one debt that we're retiring in December. That's a significant amount of money.
no doubt about it. So anything in that list?
And that's before we even start
projects
talking
that
about
we-
rate adjustments.
Anything in this
Be
list?
all right
that
if we
you-
don't
Now,
adjust
just
them
keep,
much.
just bear in mind one thing, rehabilitation costs are not very predictable. I mean, you can go video line and it can run through everything from the storm sewer or, you know, replacing the whole street again. I mean,
Video while it's raining.
yeah,
We can find a lot of issues in,
I'm sure we can.
instead of the middle of the summer.
But, you know, so the cushion of security is important, knowing that, you know, these costs are not as predictable as what we'd like them to be.
Well,
'Cause
again,
they're just not.
there's none of these are going to be a set fee. You know, this is the cost. This is it. It's not going to change.
Right.
And the mere fact that you deal with an old system with an old line, and there's contingencies on what's down there, same as I mentioned before, when you're
Right.
rehabbing a old home, there's certain things you find that have to add some more money in order to get it fixed. And while you're there, let's go ahead and get it fixed.
Right.
But I don't want to tell a contractor either, oh, we've got $6 million to spend this year on that, because it's going to be $5,999,999 if that's what you tell
I'm
them.
glad you didn't say engineers. We're like that too, probably. So, anything in there that you had a different idea about or want to do something? Because we'll proceed with those.
Look good to me.
Move
That
forward.
list. Let's go.
I'd like
As
to
long as
see
we-
you start an RFQ with an engineer.
Okay.
I'd like to see that too. Do we need to vote on that?
I mean, you want to break it into
He
five?
can do that. He can do that without us. He can do
You
that
don't need to
anytime he
vote
wants.
to do an
Okay.
RFQ, do you? Okay.
Well, I'll do RFQs on the two big projects, and then maybe just recommend that we use engineers that I think can accomplish the other ones without going through an RFQ process for those. I mean, studies and that kind of stuff. Is that okay?
That's 1, 2, and 4.
1, 2, and 4 we'll do RFQs for. And then 3 and 5 we'll recommend consultants.
Okay.
What other problems you got?
Well, Auburn lost to Florida Saturday
He
night.
sure did. I'm gonna quit watching. Every time I watch them, they lose.
I know.
Somebody just have to tell me.
Okay.
Anything else?
Any questions?
Anybody else?
Any questions for Mr. Peterson?
Yep.
Thank
you,
y'all
Richard.
very much.
Thank you.
All right. Mr. Johnson.
And I'll try to keep this short and simple. Y'all all aware of the proposal for the Portico project, which is on Fairhope Avenue, just east of the post office. That whole site, especially our portion of Fairhope Avenue and immediately upstream, has had an issue with drainage, meaning that the system taking that water eventually to, I believe that's Big Mouth Gully, a little bit further to the north, does not have the capacity or it is in a poor state of condition to not only convey the stormwater. So we get street flooding on Fairhope Avenue during intense rainfalls. That watershed is basically coming from the central part of downtown, from the high point to the east on Fairhope Avenue, as well as far to the south from Johnson Road. All that comes down into that bowl. Mr. Haley, who is the developer of Portico, came to us and discussed the issue, and we're both in agreement that it needs to be addressed as part of this project. And the question was, could a partnership be achieved? And as I told him, I would bring anything and discuss anything with the council in consideration of that. So he did have his engineer, who's Chris Lieb, a local professional engineer, do the drainage study and size what he thinks that system needs to be. I've reviewed those numbers and concur. Right now out there is equivalent of a 54-inch pipe, whereas what's required is double 48s, which is a considerable amount more capacity to carry that water. And the proposal that I want to at least get you to think about and give some input on is a private-public partnership where the city provides the materials, which is the pipe, the boxes, and the end treatments, His engineer does the design, and his contractor does all the install. We will have right to inspect and accept, and we get this problem fixed, and his development can move on. If we did this as a standalone drainage project, my estimation, it would be somewhere around $225,000 to $250,000. The estimated cost that you see in there for the materials, and it's not inexpensive, is right around $95,000. But it solves a problem, and going back with concrete pipes and precast box, the service life is 50 years, but in reality, concrete pipe, if installed correctly, lasts indefinitely. And I don't think this council or your public works director will ever have to worry about that system in our lifetimes of public service. How I am accustomed to handling these is that we will work with the city attorney to develop an MOU, which defines the relationship of each person's or each party's roles, and then we would bring that back to you as well as a bid estimate for the material cost for y'all to consider authorizing and approving. If this is something that you're not comfortable with, you know, again, it's one of those things that we can relay that back to the developer and see what other options there are. But I think this is one of those things where his problem and our problem gets addressed, and there's kind of a equitable sharing of the cost. Any questions?
I want to know. You say it's been our problem. What are the symptoms of this problem? What are we seeing along Fairhope Avenue that indicates it's our problem?
Well, there, and again, we can always divvy up that it's not maybe 100% of our problem, but there's no doubt that all of Fairhope Avenue and the connecting streets that come to that low point all drain to that point, either by pipe or by gutter flow, and we end up with a flooding situation there in that sag of that curve, the vertical curve there in that bottom where those inlets are.
Are we seeing a major flooding issue there, or is it a massive rains, or are we seeing a flood crossing the street there with a 2-inch rain? I mean,
if we get an intense rainfall, even if it's a short duration and not necessarily a whole lot of rainfall, but maybe a couple inches in a very short period of time, yes, that we do get gutter full flooding throughout that cross section of Fairhope Avenue.
Jack, I can shed some light on it if it's appropriate.
please, if you want to address this, just you come up here, Mr. Haley, and then you can go ahead if you want to. Come on, just don't do it from your seat though. Come up to the mic.
When I bought this property, I talked to several of the tenants there, and most of this is anecdotal, but they've all said that water has jumped the curb and sidewalk and entered their businesses there. The Andrea, can't remember her last name, Faust was in there. There was a guy that sold Mardi Gras trinkets that was in there. They all shared stories of water actually entering their businesses. So the reason I brought this to Richard was, you know, I hate to build a nice brand new project and have water from the city street overrun the curb and enter a brand new building.
Yeah, that's the kind of input I was looking for.
Again, it's anecdotal. I don't have pictures. I don't have dates or number of occurrences, but that's what I've been told by the businesses that occupied the building that we since torn down.
And I do have, at least I know those of long tenure, such as Arthur Beausarge, has made very clear that that's a reoccurring flooding issue in that location.
And
I have not witnessed it personally, but I hope not to.
This is not water from my site. This is water transmitting across my site. There happens to be an existing storm drain that goes through there. There's no easement. It's been there for who knows how many years, but I'm trying to offer the city to fix a problem while I've got the site opened up for my drainage for my project.
Would we have access to that to maintain that, or would we be liable for should something occur to that drainage? I mean, that's not going to go under a major structure there or anything.
No, it's actually going through a driveway through the middle of my project, and I would expect if we get attorney involved and do a memo of understanding that we would craft some kind of an easement for the city to have full access across there.
Maintenance easement?
Technically, they probably have a prescriptive easement now because it's been there for years, but let's get it done right and get it on record and get it mapped out.
Yeah, and that would be and I probably didn't write it very well, but under the final acceptance and service life maintenance for that main line, for that trunk line going through there, he would be responsible for maintenance of the drainage on his site, but it would be connecting to this as well. But the main line that is transmitting stormwater from the city street to the gully, yes, I would recommend that we obtain a legal easement for the city council and the public works director 100 years from now when they have to go do some maintenance. So,
And two more questions. When you have this, you're going to have a lot more flow going into the gully right there. What's there to protect that gully? You've got two 48-inch pipes just free flowing into that gully. Is there something there that's going to slow that flow down?
There is now. There's a stepped riprap going all the way down the side of the gully that the city has added to over the years. I think as recently as 2 years ago they upgraded that, and I don't know.
Would it handle the new
yes,
flow?
All the water today is still going to that same location. We're just saying we're going to get there in a pipe instead of a pipe and flooding across the land. Apparently, back after the April 29, 2014 event, we got an NRC, NRSC grant, and that outfall has been protected, and there is a box that they'll be able to tie into, and I did put a little money in for an in treatment, so I don't see any issue with the outfall. It's been reinforced. It's all the infrastructure upstream to Fairhope that's the issue.
Richard, one point of clarification. I had not seen this memo till I pulled it up online, but I'm not comfortable, and I doubt my engineer is comfortable, of us taking the design risk for the city stormwater needs. Again, this is all water that's coming from off of my site, through my site, and I don't want to take on that liability of me or my engineer designing city stormwater needs.
So you're saying shift the cost of the engineering to the city. What's that, another 15%?
Probably not that high. This is pretty straightforward engineering.
It's really straightforward. My engineer did a quick and dirty analysis of what size pipe we would need. It's a straight run to a box in the back, and I think there's 2 junction boxes in there. It's fairly simple. I just don't want the design risk if it's undersized or something happens, and it's all this city water coming from upstream, uphill from my site. I just don't think that's fair to ask me to design a system going across my property.
Can you do it, Richard?
Or I will work with Mr. Lieb. I mean, that's what a PE gets paid to do, is that the developer doesn't take the design risk, the engineer with his seal, and if I need to do that, that's fine. The biggest reason that I suggest that he do it, he's already designing all of that system that's going to connect to it, and the coordination would be logical that the same engineer who's designing all the drainage for the site development is designing the main trunk, so that's all coordinated. But
what if he did all the design and then you signed off on it as a city?
I wouldn't have any problem with that.
That's fine. Richard's point's accurate. I mean, to coordinate it all and to get it all on paper in CAD for the contractor, Chris, I think, is fine doing that. I just don't want the design risk if something happens in the future for us to somebody to come back and say, hey, developer, you designed the city stormwater.
If he doesn't take the risk and Richard signs on behalf of the city, his costs go down as well, because part of his costs are that risk.
I think we can handle that in the memo of understanding, is that we have the right to review whatever the work product is, and once we sign off, then that's on us, and I'm comfortable with that, because understand, in effect, when we do subdivisions and everything else, we're reviewing them for compliance. And even though there is a period of time that the original engineer has a connection to it, but there is a statute of limitations, and once that is over, it's us anyway. It's, at the end of the day, it's always us. So I think we can work through that technicality.
Council, y'all have a number. I mean, there's a number of material costs of estimated costs of $95,000. I would like to, you put a number on that, and then how are you going to? Then where's that money come from? I mean, we can keep saying that we have plenty of money in the budget, but eventually, $100,000 at a time, we're going to run out of money. So
we just approved $100,000 for sidewalks.
I'm just asking. I mean, it's got to come from somewhere. I mean, to move forward, you got to be confident that we have it.
Well, this is just a discussion right now.
Well, I want to know whether we need to put it on the next agenda or not.
Yeah, I need some
You know,
feedback, some
They
direction.
need some
Yeah.
guidance,
Yeah.
whether we're going to take action on it or
Yeah.
whether it's going to lie for however
My
long.
concern is I'm ready to start construction, and once I start site work, the opportunity's passed us to fix the problem. I built a brand-new building there, and it floods from city streets and stormwater. We're all going to look silly if we didn't fix the problem when we had the opportunity to. And I think you guys just talked about $300,000 is budgeted to fix a stormwater problem on Church Street. I don't know the size of that problem, but we've got another problem on Fairhope Avenue, and I'm willing to share in some of the cost and willing to help get it done while my site's opened up, so.
I think it makes sense to go ahead and do it now. But your point's well taken that we do need to be mindful of 100,000 here and there adds up pretty quickly.
Or
But
you can just say you can just say to provide the materials. And that's, with that estimated cost, and you could just agree to supply the materials. And if it's
Well, that's always asking,
2,000
right?
instead of 95,000.
Well, it's gonna be,
Or
you
if
got
it's 85,000
tax,
instead of 95,000.
you got tax on that, so you got another $9,000.
Well, the good news is we wouldn't pay tax.
Oh, we would?
No. So, and how I
Darn, I
envision
should have
it,
bought my material from you guys.
well, but this is going into a public easement for drainage, so it's not, that's.
Can you
the-
get Amazon Prime on these boxes?
Well, and I was very conservative with the boxes. I'm hoping that number comes down, doesn't go up. The pipe.
2-day free shipping.
The pipe we went ahead and bid out because that is a reoccurring product that we buy anyway, and
Right.
so those are good numbers. What I imagine is that if there was a comfort level with the council, then we would get with Mr. Marcus about an MOU and at least provide him the details of what the city's concerns are, what the developer concerns are, get that roughed out. And then the biggest thing is we got to get the boxes, actually a hard design on them, and then we can go out and get those priced. Because we'll have to get a competitive price on those because they are going to exceed, as a combined 3 boxes, more than $15,000, which does kick into public bid law requirement. Hopefully it's under 50, so we just have to get them quoted out, so.
What's your pleasure, council?
Well,
So
I
let's
had
do it
another
while we're in
question,
there.
Just looking at it, was there any reason we didn't put a box on the other side of the street also? Because the majority of that water comes from that area beside Ace Hardware.
There is no doubt that that is, and
And if it-
again, we haven't got to hard design yet.
Right.
And that may be something that we look at. The biggest challenge that we already know, that box that is kind of schematically shown, it is literally underneath the asphalt of that lane of Fairhope Avenue. So we're going to be, somebody's digging up the road to replace it. And it was, how much poison can we stand? Do we want to end up cutting up the whole road? So, again, that may be one of those things that when his contractor's out there and we find that may be a valuable thing that Public Works may come in and just do that on their
I
dime.
think there is a
Get that
box
done.
on the other side, Richard.
Yeah, I believe there is, yes.
I think there's, I don't know what size or what feeds it. The problem is there's no real mapping. Nobody really knows what's there until you put a video camera in there.
Would you extend just one of the 48-inch pipes across the road to an inlet and have one on the north side, one on the south side there?
Or possibly two, if we've got enough capacity to convey it, yes, sir. Again, that's an inaccessible box at this point in time.
Kind of like back, if we're going to fix it, let's fix it
Yes, sir.
once.
Yes, sir.
That's kind of what I was talking about.
Right. That's exactly what
There's
you're
a
saying.
ton of water coming through that area that comes across the street that will funnel into that box eventually, but it seems like it'd be a better plan to come here and there. Pick up this box will pick up this water, and this box will pick up that water. But again, that'll be up to your engineer to decide. Like I said, there's no hard plans one way or the other.
We're just trying to get a conceptual.
Materials, Robert. Materials, Kevin.
Yeah.
All right, proceed.
Thank you,
What I'm
sir.
hearing.
Thank you.
One thing that we may want to remember is, once we do this, set this precedent of this joint venture, we may be looking at a lot
Okay.
of them. What you do it for one, you do it for everybody.
Folks, we are on item number 3 of the work session agenda. And I know that a couple of the council members under their committee updates have a couple of very important presentations to make. So we're going to switch gears here soon. I was going to try to get through 4 at least.
I'm going to go quick.
Good.
This is just a rough overview of what our cash accounts and balances look like, and that's the very detailed worksheet, and I can send you the Excel worksheet for this, but just let me know that. The other sheet I have is just, in fact, let's go to the second sheet first. All right, this is a little more organized. One of the key ratios that you can use to determine do you have adequate cash is this cash coverage ratio. And if you look down at the very bottom is the formula. Available cash plus reserve cash divided by monthly operating expenses, and monthly debt service. So that ratio gives you an idea of how much coverage you have of cash against operating expenses. All right. So it start at the top. To the far right is that coverage ratio for the general fund for the FY16 year, September 31st. So we were sitting there with basically 5.2 months worth of cash, or cash enough to cover 5.2 months worth of operating expenses, monthly debt expense. Now, when the last time I was in a bond rating with S&P, and we were asking them about this, if they said if you have a coverage ratio of 2.5 to 3, he said we're happy. So that's kind of, give you a target there. Now, FY17 actual year-end numbers, we were at 6.4. Then using the FY18 budget, we're down to 5.2, but that's just because we've shifted some operating expenses in the FY18 budget from utility to general fund, so that's greater. So bottom line is those numbers are very, very, very strong. All right, next section is gas. And you can see gas, their operating expenses is a lot lower than the other departments. They have a FY16, 9.1 months worth of coverage, 9.8, currently looking at 11.4. That's very, very strong. But then, like I said, gas is a smaller entity as far as expenses go. Electric fund, now they are a little bit different. FY16, 0.7 of a month. FY17, 0.8 of a month. Now, using the FY18 budget, we're looking at 1.8. So that is getting healthier. Then water and sewer fund, we started at just under 1, then 2.9, and using the FY18 budget, 3.7. So you can see things getting better just from 16 to 17 to the FY18 budget. And then if you look at the bottom, I combined all the numbers, general fund and utilities. So we're going from 3.3 months of coverage in FY16 to 4.3 to 4.6. So again, that that's a strong number. So we've got a lot of strong numbers. So that's basically what that page does. And I'm going to try to kind of track through this month by month and just track these numbers, general fund, utilities, combined, that kind of thing. So now when I go back, I want to go back very briefly to the first page. That's a list of all the bank accounts we have. And they're categorized. There's a kind of a tinted column about 4 or 5 columns in. And that is account type. So this is sorted by account type. And available means basically available for operating costs. All right. And then I've got some totals for that. We've got certain bank accounts that are are designated for capital items, and that's the capital section. We have other bank accounts, and a lot of these are Regions Trust accounts that are dedicated to debt service. So I've got that. Now, the actual reserves account, there's really, as far as I know, just the rainy day fund is actually designated officially as a reserve account. So that's what I'm putting in reserve. And then the bottom line is the restricted type of accounts. Things that we only use for one purpose. They're restricted to that purpose. So now I've got descriptions over there on the very right-hand column. These descriptions I pulled from this schedule as I pulled it forward from Deborah's schedules. So I'm kind of, if I see something I need to change over there, I'm kind of changing it, but that's an explanation of what it is. Now, and just very briefly, if you go down to the very bottom line, and it's total funds across the whole general fund, utilities, and the first balance column is 2011, and then we go annually after that. So you can see we're at 20 million, 34 million, 35 million, 28 million. That's when we did that bond issue for construction purposes, and we were holding a lot of cash, construction cash. Mm-hmm. That's why those jumped up. Okay, then 29 million, 28 million, FY17, 37 million. Right now we're looking at sitting at 38 million. That's everything together. So this is just kind of, here are the kind of accounts we have, here are the kind of balances that are in them. So that's, like I said, just a very brief overview, and I will, as time goes on, I'll get into more and more detail in my evaluation analysis of all this, trying to put together numbers that will keep you up to date on where we are without getting lost in the weeds. So that's really the big thing I want to try to do is, don't get lost in the weeds. Just give you big numbers, big picture numbers that are relevant, that can tell us something.
Are there any opportunities for consolidating some of these accounts?
There is. And that's another thing that I'm going to get to. So I've dived into some of these accounts just because I happen to have a reason to have to dive into them, but there's others where I haven't really done that. So that's part of my process as ongoing, is to look at all these things. But as you can see with the number of restricted accounts there are, you're kind of...
Can't do much with those.
Yes, you can't do much with those.
The only thing you have is the first third
of the page.
Two kind of major groupings, I would call it, the available and the capital.
Yep.
But then even within some of that, even within capital, even within a lot of that other stuff, are somewhat restricted to what they can be used for.
Well, yeah, they may be restricted as to type of capital, but as a general category, they're restricted to capital. So, and again, you can parse this down to, where we really are in the weeds.
I'd like for you to take a little bit more of a deep dive on that. And then on available and on capital again, and say these funds can be used, and just, and then you can have a column, can be used for, I would say, infrastructure upgrades, but that would be public works. Streets.
Almost like having subcategories under capital.
And this could be used for sewer. And you may have some repetition in it. This could be used for sewer, this could be used for electric, this could be used for gas.
Yeah.
And then some things, can't be used for that.
I think what I'll do is I'll try to get a little more granular in there,
Yeah.
and then I'll just give y'all the spreadsheet so that you can sort it and filter it like you want to. Because that's one reason I just printed out the page, is because
that's good.
Anyway, you can
That's real good.
if you get into that, you can do a lot of different ways to sort it, and I just wanted to just kind of lay it out just real basic.
Thank you.
Okay.
For instance, if you look at capital improvements to sewer system on the last two of that second grouping under capital, you would think, and if I'm reading that right, just that Those last two could go directly to sewer system upgrades. There's our funding right there.
And
for
the
that.
second one,
And the second one, the 2
Yeah.
points,
yeah, 2.3.
but that says capital projects, infrastructure, I don't know if that's, has to be towards like public works projects, it may
Yeah.
be. So
And see,
that's
what-
why you be careful with that.
And one of the things I'm doing is as I go through and I have to dive into one of them, I'm trying to find the source documentation that says this is what this is for. And so I will,
Gotcha.
that is actually a good idea. And
Right.
so I'll focus on that, is trying to break some of these down into components.
And then if you take the debt service a step forward, as we retire that debt, you could have a footnote, this will be retired in 2019, or this will be retired in 2020, freeing up X
Yeah.
amount just do it per year.
Yeah.
And that way, for 3, 4, 5-year planning, we know what's becoming available for us to spend because one of the things that we did several years ago, rather than, wait to pay down some debt, when we could retire some, we took from our rainy day reserves, but we built it back up over the year because we retired that debt when we could.
Yeah.
If you do it
And,
in
you
the
know, we're-
off-hurricane season.
And we're in a
it's good
situation
idea.
now with the 25% sales tax that we're putting aside for debt reduction, capped at 1.2.
Right.
If we do that again for next year, by the time we get to June of next year, we can pay off all the general fund debt.
Right.
There'll be enough to do that.
Right, and then we have to ask ourselves, does it make sense to divert it to these improvements,
Yeah.
or just to go ahead and just eliminate the debt? And
Yeah.
then we have
And
that
then
money
once
freed
you,
up.
yeah, once you get those freed up, then
Then you
you're
divert
drawing
it.
less from the utilities.
Yep.
And then you've created funds for the utilities
Yep,
to
that's
do a
right.
lot of these projects we talked about. So they kind of, they flow into each other.
That's how it's gonna cascade now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as time goes on, I'm going to be building up kind of a cash flow model, but it's going to take a little bit of time because, you can get lost in the weeds. I mean, I can get lost in the weeds, so you want to keep it big picture and relevant. So that's what I got for you.
Okay,
And of course, you can always call.
excellent.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
you're welcome.
Council, we got 15 minutes. I know we've got a lot of things on this work session. I think what you have, Councilman Brown, is extremely important.
You?
Do you want to bring that up now?
Sure.
Okay.
Kind of jumping ahead to the committee updates. The EAC is asking for us to approve their recommendation of the $350,000 that was appropriated to the schools as follows. The high school, $70,000 for math intervention teacher. Middle school, $70,000 math intervention teacher. And Lisa has a resolution she's going to hand out that has these numbers as well. Intermediate school, $70,000 math or reading intervention teacher. J. Larry Newton Elementary, $70,000 math instructional coach. And Fairhope Elementary, $70,000 math or reading intervention teacher. In their memo, intervention teachers work directly with students identified through RTI. Instructional coaches work directly with teachers to develop strategies and break down data to improve teacher instruction. The need for either a math or reading intervention teacher will depend upon the need as identified by test results. EAC goes on to say, we believe it is critical for students to master the disciplines of both reading and mathematics. Hiring full-time intervention teachers will allow for remediation intervention in a small group or one-on-one setting. Instruction in this type of environment has proven to be the most effective way in which to teach struggling students in particular. The success of this investment will be measured by the variance between fall and spring benchmark testing. Scantron is our new method of testing. Additionally, for those schools who elect to hire a reading intervention teacher, success will be measured by the growth in reading levels using the Fontes and Pinnell guided reading system. Both the EAC and principals are grateful for your ongoing financial commitment to our students. And I think y'all have heard me talk before kind of how we ended up with this recommendation. The EAC met with the principals and got a more detailed, if you will, list of what they wanted. Kind of went back and forth with the EAC, and then the school board kind of stepped in and wanted a little bit more generic, something a little bit more controllable, I think, from their standpoint, since they are the ones administering this money. So rather than making it more of a task on the school board and monitoring, then this is a more straightforward. Each school is is simplified in what the money is going towards. And this falls in line with the Acrobus study and what the EAC is. Next step is to try to find a more permanent method of funding, so it's not doesn't have to come from the city budget for these positions. And these similar positions were funded last year through the same appropriations.
Questions, comments?
You said these similar positions were funded by?
Last year with our appropriations, yes. Similar recommendation.
Yeah, I mean, my only thought on this is, and obviously I defer to the principals and the school board on how they think we should go on this. You know, when you're essentially funding positions, as opposed to there being a new yearly recommendation for this money, this is essentially the last recommendation they make, because it's taking that $350,000 and it's a permanent position, unless they decide these are no longer needed, I guess, at some point down the road. You know, and so I worry that additional things will come up that will be needed, and this money is now pledged for the foreseeable future.
This is not a pledge. This is a one-year commitment. And that's why the EAC, and that, you know, and I've talked to Jack about it, you know, the kind of the permanent nature of hiring a teacher, but if it's been done in the past and the EAC is looking forward and this is what the county is backing with their recommendation, then if you're against the funding of teachers, I get it, but if this is what their recommendation is.
And I'm absolutely not against it. I just wanted to, you know, the
permanent
concern
nature,
of
I
anything
understand.
of the permanent nature of something like this. It's a year-to-year basis it's permanent for them, but it's year-to-year for us. And so I just worry about that long-term. But again, like I said, I defer to the people that make that decision and deciding what they think their own schools need. And if this is what they say, then I support that.
And I think some of them last year might have been part-time. I'm not sure if all of them were.
I think they all were. I asked that question. It was my concern as well, is that this becoming a permanent nature, and if we don't fund it next year, they have to let teachers go. It really goes against the spirit of what we had originally said we wanted out of EAC. I want to support EAC as much as everybody at this table does. I want to support their recommendations, but I have some reservations over the funding of permanent, I say permanent, full-time teacher positions. This is the 6th different recommendation in 6 years. We keep saying we're going to measure the return on investment. I haven't seen a return on investment from last year's. I haven't seen somebody say this is what the scores are based on the coaches that we paid for last year. I'm hearing again we're going to get some measurements if we were to fund this year after year to see what improvements they made. I haven't seen last year's. It seems to me like EAC would be bringing us some numbers that said supports what we did last year, and that would go a long way towards me wanting to support this more.
Well, I gave a report on the guided reading program and what it's done at the elementary school. I can't remember all the details, but I did give a report on that.
Was it vastly? But was it improved? I shouldn't say vastly, but was it improved?
Yeah, it was improved. Yes.
There was one other thing. There's a couple other things that I do have in the back of my mind. Is we as a council are going to be approached to do things more to keep our kids safe in the schools. People are going to ask for money to put resource officers in the schools, maybe other safety measures. And, I wonder, would some of this money be needed for that? We are looking to purchase the K1 Center, which would be an educational institution. Would the money be used to that? So there's to me, a lot of variables here, and it concerns me to, I'm not saying no, but I really have some heartache over it. My thoughts?
Had the same thought about the school resource officers, especially over the last few weeks of national news, and then a question on some of the accelerated reading and other items that have been implemented in the past. have they found new sources of funding to keep those in place, or have they tried it for a year or two and then they abandon it?
No, it's
if
still
we're
in
doing
place.
this? Okay, so they've just got a new source of funding
Right.
that.
And part of the funding, I think 2 years ago, went, the county implemented the guided reading in one school in each feeder pattern or one class. I can't remember the details of it. I should, but, and the council with their funding was able to implement it across the board
Gotcha.
in the elementary schools. So that was, a big step. And now I get, Jack makes a point of, this is a 7th different recommendation coming from the EAC, sixth, whatever it is. But you also got to remember the EAC is a revolving board. They've been working with 4 different superintendents at the Baldwin County School Board. They've worked with how many different councilmen and councilwomen since they were implemented. So, and then top that off, the measures of testing have changed. Now they're going back to a Scantron. It was, something else. Before that, it was another method. So to try to compare apples to apples, a student as he's coming up, that's hard to do as well because of.
I'm still waiting to see our return on investment. I mean, it's $350,000 a year. I just hadn't seen it.
I don't know how you'll ever see what that is.
Well, they just
though.
said how they would. That's what they proposed last year, was they were going to compare test scores, and that's exactly what they said this year. We're going to compare before and after test scores. But then are they going to, come back next year? Well, we can't do it. We changed our standardized test, or we're going to change what we asked for, and so we're just going to keep on just on the hook for $350,000 to infinity and without ever seeing a return.
Yeah, but I mean, looking at test scores, I mean, you got different kids, different students, different classes every year. I mean, to try to judge.
I'm not the one who said they
group.
were going to measure that.
Well, I know, but I'm just saying, I mean, to be able to quantify return on investment in education is really, in my opinion, almost impossible to do. I think this is one of those things where you have to trust the people you're giving this money to that specialize in this, that know what they're doing, and just move forward with it. I mean, I think we all feel that education needs to be supported in whatever way. And I know, Jack, you're saying some of that money is, we're talking about the potential purchase of the K-1 Center, and I get that, and I know there's a lot of educational uses that will come out of that, but I don't know that that's all that'll come out of it, and so I don't know that should be the end of our educational investment if there's other ways we can still keep doing what we're doing.
In this proposal right now, the board, Baldwin County Board of Education, the EAC, and the principals are all on board with this
Correct.
proposal.
Let's be honest, the Board of Education and the principals want the path of least resistance. They want the least amount of work. They want the money, $70,000, 5 schools. Hey, hire a teacher, make everybody happy, their work's done. No reporting, that's what they want. Let's be honest about it. You all know it. You all know it.
So,
Well, I'll say this, the money's geared right now to go to them. They're well aware of the fact that it's a year-to-year deal. And if they choose to put it, and they all recommend to put it in this position, I feel this is the best position to put them in for this year. And next year, if it doesn't work out that we can do it this much, it's going to be up to them to figure out how to continue the process.
And that's one of
But the money's geared right now to go.
Yeah, you said they're exploring opportunities, options for permanent funding.
right.
And it sounds like they've gotten there on the guided reading, and maybe we can, get them there on this too.
Well, when we get to the council meeting, we'll, somebody make a motion to amend the agenda and add this, if you so want, or it can wait until the next meeting, or you can add it on tonight. Does it have to be a unanimous vote to be added? I think according to our rules, it does, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Jimmy, you had something real quick? We've got about 4 minutes.
Yes, we got 5 minutes. The Environmental Advisory Board had a presentation from B.J. Smith with Shore Combers, and if we got 5 minutes for her to come up and give a presentation that
Yes.
they'd like for the council to hear what she has to say.
All right, thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, What we've got is a way to mobilize, since you guys are into numbers, a way to mobilize $250,000 in volunteer labor for, as a litter initiative for Fairhope. Let's see, what we want to do, the program is for Mobile and Baldwin counties. It involves encouraging people to bend over and pick up litter as opposed to just stepping over it, which is what most of us have to do because we're busy and it's everywhere. This is a reusable litter bag. It'll actually be this beautiful color blue, and with just, let's see, 1% of your population is about 155 people. So if we just go with 144, because my telephone was dying and I was trying to do the math in a hurry, then, and we combine it with the watershed, the stormwater markers program. So we've split folks into the watershed, and we're tackling it one watershed by watershed. That keeps us from comparing apples to oranges, urban areas with rural areas. And also, the Environmental Review Board is going to have a big educational program to go along with the watershed markers. So we have teams operating in each watershed, and that's how we get to 144. We're just asking for you to fund 1% of the volunteers. The other volunteers beyond 144 would come from private sources, neighborhood groups, individuals. And so to get your, each volunteer just working 3 hours a week would bring you a value of about $1,560 a year. So that's $1,560 a year just off of one of these bags. And to do 144 people brings us to the $250,000 worth of volunteer hours, volunteer labor. And your investment would only be $2,160. Plus, you get the bonus that people who pick up trash are less likely to litter, and people who see volunteers picking up trash are less likely to litter. And the city of Mobile, we've proven that if people see municipal public works picking up trash, then they feel quite okay to throw their bag out the window. How'd I do?
Questions, council?
Right on time.
Okay.
Questions?
Don't have any.
So bottom line, what are we asking
So
for?
the concept, I guess, would be to,
160?
$2,160.
1560 or 2160?
Yep.
$2,160.
and you'd have 144 people would receive the bag, that blue color, that would basically be an initiative to encourage people not to litter and to clean up, and by seeing fellow citizens picking up trash, people will be less likely to litter, is the gist of the program. And then distribution, y'all would do that through the
Environmental Review
advisory
Board.
board.
Yeah,
Okay.
advisory board.
So
Richard?
And I think we probably could, I'm assuming this is for the bags, correct?
Yes, for the bags, and there's a support program, a social media program and support
We
that goes
probably
with
could
it.
handle the procurement of the bags through the existing supply accounts in solid waste. So glad that you don't have to do an additional appropriation.
Yeah. We don't even have to do, we could just ask the mayor to write a check.
So,
We don't even have to, does everybody agree with that? Mayor, would you write on the check or take care of that?
No.
2160
It might be-
less or less? Okay.
Well, this is the idea is to also bring you into the campaign that is the two-county-wide campaign with the, it's in the bag, reusable trash bag.
All right.
Okay?
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Now,
BJ.
I just have one question. If the bag goes to a volunteer, who volunteers for 3 months, or 5 of them volunteer for 3 months, and then move or do something, they go take the bag with them, or they turn it back in?
I would suggest that they turn it back in, that they check it out.
Basically, it's every man for himself.
They check it out with a pledge that they're
Right.
going to commit to so many
Right.
hours a week.
Okay.
And if they don't, then,
Is what it is.
yep.
All right.
All right.
Let's
Thank you.
adjourn and
Thank you very much.
meet here in about
Thank
3
you.
minutes.